Have you
Don't
ever
worry,
lost
the ambulance
everything
is here.
because you chose to do the right thing? That's
The
what happened to
paramedics
a
will
single
take a look.
mother who stopped to help a stranger on a rainy morning, a stranger who turned out to be the billionaire boss she'd never met. One small act of kindness would change both of their lives forever. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The morning rain had left Portland glistening, every puddle on the street catching bits of gray light from a sky that hadn't yet decided if it would clear. Grace Whitmore tightened the strap of her old leather purse as she hurried down Hawthorne Boulevard, her boots slapping softly against the wet sidewalk. She'd learned to move quickly without spilling her coffee, without bumping into anyone, and without ever looking flustered. But today, that calm rhythm broke Mrs. Alvarez had just texted that she'd be 15 minutes late to watch Noah. 15 minutes. That was all it took to unravel Grace's carefully balanced morning. She glanced at her watch. 7:45. The meeting at 8:30 sharp. Her boss, Marcus Harlan, had already warned her twice about punctuality. "Grace, I need reliability," he'd said last week, his tone smooth but cold. "We can't make exceptions for personal matters." She'd smiled, polite and small, hiding how the words burned. Single motherhood had taught her to patch together small miracles every day, packing lunches, paying bills, finding patience when she was running on coffee and worry. It wasn't the life she'd planned at 25, but it was theirs. Hers and Noah's. The city smelled faintly of rain and roasted beans from the corner cafe. A bus rumbled by, splashing the curb. Grace quickened her pace past shopfronts waking to the day, bookstores, barbers, a bakery releasing its first warm breath of bread into the damp air. Then came the sound. A screech of tires. A heavy thud. A groan. Grace froze, heart hammering. Just ahead, near the crosswalk, a man lay crumpled beside a toppled briefcase, papers scattered across wet pavement. The bike that had hit him sped away, its rider glancing back only once before vanishing around the corner. Grace's pulse raced. The world seemed to narrow to the man's labored breathing and the rising panic in her chest. She looked at her watch again, 7:48. The office was only 3 blocks away. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she was running. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked, kneeling beside him. The man was maybe in his 40s, handsome in a rugged way, though his tailored charcoal suit was now streaked with dirt and coffee. He tried to sit up, gasping. "My ankle," he muttered, grimacing. Grace saw the angle unnatural. Wrong. "You need medical help," she said, reaching for her phone. "No ambulance," he insisted, voice sharp, commanding. "I have a meeting." A humorless laugh escaped her. "You can't even stand." Their eyes met his sharp blue, hers wide with concern, and something unspoken passed between them. He tried again to rise, only to fall back against the brick wall, pale and shaking. Grace's thumb pressed 911. "I'm calling anyway," she said quietly. While she waited for dispatch, she gathered the papers fluttering in the wind. One page caught her eye letterhead reading Elliot Chambers, Chief Executive Officer, Aurora Innovations. Her breath caught. Aurora was her company. "You work at Aurora?" she asked, disbelief softening her voice. The man Elliot nodded. "You do too?" "Administrative assistant, marketing department," she said, almost apologetic. The siren's wail broke the moment. Within minutes, paramedics arrived, efficient and calm. They lifted him gently, confirmed the ankle fracture. Before they wheeled him away, he caught Grace's wrist. "Thank you," he said. "Most people would have walked on." Grace tried to smile. "You're welcome, sir." "Elliot," he corrected softly. "Please." Her heart thudded once more, uneasy. She looked at her watch. 8:10. She was already late. By the time she reached Aurora's glass tower, her soaked boots squeaked against the marble floor. Marcus Harlan was waiting at her desk, arms folded, expression carved from stone. "My office. Now." She followed him in silence, rain still clinging to her coat. The room smelled of stale coffee and authority. "This is the 3rd time this month, Grace," Marcus began, sliding a paper across the desk. "I warned you, no more excuses." "There was an accident," she said quietly. "I helped a man." "There's always an accident. Or a neighbor. Or your son." His words struck like slaps. I run a department, not a daycare. You're dismissed. The paper trembled in her hands. Termination notice. Outside, her coworkers avoided her eyes. Diane from accounting mouthed, "I'm sorry." Grace gathered her few things, a small plant, framed photos of Noah, a mug painted with wobbly letters, "World's Best Mom." She didn't cry until the elevator doors closed. By the time she stepped out into the rain again, the clouds had thinned to a dull silver, and the city felt unbearably wide. She walked toward the bus stop, cardboard box in arms, as if carrying the last fragile pieces of her life. The phone rang. Mrs. Alvarez. "Grace, dear, did you get to work all right?" I'm not at work anymore," she whispered. "Oh, honey, what happened?" Grace blinked away tears. "I stopped to help someone who was hurt. I guess that was my final mistake." "That's terrible," Mrs. Alvarez exclaimed. Grace could almost picture her neighbor's kind eyes widening behind her glasses. "You helped someone and they fired you for it? Dios mío, what's wrong with people these days?" Grace sank onto the bench at the bus stop, balancing the cardboard box on her lap. A drizzle began again, thin and silver. "I don't know, Mrs. Alvarez. Maybe they're right. Maybe I just keep making bad choices." "Listen to me," the older woman said firmly. "Kindness is never a bad choice. You did what a decent person should do. You hear me, Grace?" Her throat tightened. "Yes, ma'am. Come home. Dry off. Eat something warm. Tomorrow will figure itself out." Grace smiled faintly. "Thank you." When she hung up, the bus arrived with a hiss, its doors opening like a sigh. She stepped inside, paid her fare, and found a seat by the fogged window. The city blurred past bridges, coffee shops, the slow churn of river mist over the Willamette. For the first time in years, she had nowhere she needed to be. At home, the small apartment felt too quiet. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator. Each sound reminded her that Noah would come home expecting dinner, homework, help, laughter. She placed the box on the counter, staring at the little mug inside. "World's Best Mom." "Not today," she murmured. Her legs gave out before the couch. She folded herself into the cushions, exhaustion sinking through every bone. She should have been rewriting her resume, checking job listings. Instead, her eyes closed. When she woke, sunlight had faded to a soft, pearly gray. The phone buzzed on the coffee table. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, voice thick from sleep. "Miss Whitmore?" A woman's tone, crisp, professional. "This is Patricia Winters, executive assistant to Mr. Elliot Chambers at Aurora Innovations." Grace sat up straight. Yes, this is she. Mr. Chambers would like to meet with you tomorrow morning at 9 here at headquarters. Would that be possible?" Grace blinked, unsure she'd heard right. He wants to see me?" "Yes, ma'am. He asked me to arrange it personally." Her pulse quickened. "Did he say what for?" "I'm afraid not," Patricia said, her voice softening. "But he was quite insistent." Grace's mind whirled. Maybe he wanted to thank her. Maybe he'd found out she worked there and felt obligated. Or maybe her stomach sank, Marcus had complained. And this was some formal HR closure. "Yes," she said finally. 9 o'clock is fine." After hanging up, she pressed the phone to her chest, staring at the faint rainbows cast through the kitchen window. The world outside was gray again, but a fragile hope flickered inside her, stubborn as the light on wet glass. That evening, she reheated leftover pasta and waited for Noah's knock. He came bursting through the door, his backpack half open, his grin uncontainable. "Mom, Mrs. Alvarez, let me help feed the cats." That's great, honey." He stopped, noticing her tired eyes. "Did something bad happen at work?" She hesitated, then knelt to his level. "I helped someone who got hurt today, and my boss didn't like that, so I don't work there anymore." His brow furrowed, serious beyond his 10 years. "That's dumb. Helping people's the best thing you can do." She laughed softly. "Yeah, it is." He wrapped his arms around her neck. "You'll find another job. You always do." After dinner, Noah built a cardboard rocket at the table while Grace filled out online applications. Each click felt heavier than the last. Still, when she tucked him into bed, she smiled at his sleepy voice, whispering, "You're still the best mom." Later, she sat by the window, watching rain bead against the glass. Somewhere downtown, a man with a broken ankle might be thinking of the woman who'd stopped for him when no one else did. For reasons she couldn't explain, the thought steadied her. She whispered into the quiet, "Maybe this isn't the end. Maybe it's the beginning." Outside, the city lights shimmered across the river like small promises waiting to be kept. For the first time, I feel like I belong. The next morning dawned pale and misty, the kind of Portland gray that blurred the edges of everything. Grace stood in front of the small mirror above her kitchen sink, brushing her hair into a neat ponytail. Her reflection looked calmer than she felt. The phone call from Elliot Chambers' office still echoed in her mind. She tried to imagine what a CEO would want with her, a woman he barely knew, an assistant who'd been fired for being late. Maybe it was about paperwork, or liability, or just a polite thank you for helping him. But beneath the worry, a fragile spark of hope refused to die. Noah was still half asleep at the breakfast table, spooning cereal lazily. "Mom, are you going to wear your good shoes today?" She smiled faintly. "I think so. They squeak a little, but they make me feel taller." He grinned, milk dribbling down his chin. "You don't need taller, Mom. You need a cape." "Maybe someday," she said, wiping his chin with a napkin. When they left the apartment, the air carried that faint, metallic chill before rain. Grace walked Noah to Mrs. Alvarez's, her umbrella tilted over both their heads. The older woman waved from the porch, wrapped in a shawl. "Good luck today, Grace. Be brave, but don't let them talk down to you." Grace nodded, grateful for the warmth in her voice. "Thank you, Mrs. A. I'll call after." The bus ride downtown was slow. She watched the city slide by, the food carts steaming, the people with coffee cups and headphones, the morning drizzle painting silver lines on every window. She rehearsed what she'd say if Elliot asked about her firing. "Yes, I was late. Yes, I understand why Marcus did it. No, I don't regret stopping to help you." By the time she reached Aurora Innovations, her palms were damp. The glass building rose like a mirror into the clouds. She had walked out of it yesterday with a box of memories. Today, she walked in with nothing but borrowed courage. At the reception desk, Patricia Winters greeted her with a professional smile. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. Mr. Chambers will see you shortly. May I take your coat?" Grace hesitated before surrendering her umbrella and coat. "Thank you." Patricia's tone softened. "He's in a meeting, but it shouldn't be long." Grace sat in the lobby, watching people pass with badges and lattes. She wondered if anyone recognized her, the woman who'd been let go, now sitting there like a ghost who hadn't realized she'd already left the building. Minutes stretched into half an hour before Patricia approached. "He's ready for you." "Oh?" Grace followed her through a corridor of glass offices. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city and the slow-moving river beyond. When Patricia opened the door, Elliot Chambers stood near the window, leaning lightly on a cane. He turned when she entered, and the faintest smile crossed his face. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice still carrying that calm authority she remembered. "Thank you for coming." "Of course," she said, clasping her hands to keep them from trembling. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." The office smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Grace perched on the edge of the seat, her heart drumming in her chest. "I wanted to thank you properly," Elliot began. "You saved me a great deal of pain yesterday, and I owe you an apology for what happened afterward." Grace blinked. "An apology?" "Yes," he said simply. "I was told by HR that you were dismissed. I didn't realize the timing until later." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "You lost your job because you stopped to help me. That's unacceptable." She looked down, unsure what to say. "It wasn't your fault. I should have been on time." He shook his head. "You did the right thing, and sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the wrong rule." For a moment, silence settled like soft rain. "I'd like to offer you something," he continued. "Not your old position, something better. We're building a new outreach division, part of Aurora's Community Foundation. It's meant to help connect our company with real people, real needs. You have the heart for that." Grace's eyes widened. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said with a small, almost boyish grin. She laughed nervously. "I'll think about it." "You'll accept," he said gently. "I can see it in your face. You're not the kind of person who can ignore a chance to help." The words caught her off guard. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said, looking out toward the city. You stopped when no one else did. Grace followed his gaze, watching the mist roll over the river. Something inside her eased, like a door creaking open after years of being stuck. When Grace finally stepped out of Elliot's office, her legs felt strangely light, as if the ground had tilted beneath her feet. She passed Patricia's desk in a daze. "Everything all right?" Patricia asked kindly. "I think so," Grace said, still uncertain whether she had just been offered a real job or dreamed the whole conversation. The elevator ride down was quiet, except for the hum of cables. Through the glass, Portland stretched beneath her bridges, rooftops, the silver thread of the Willamette winding through. She pressed her fingers to her lips, half smiling, half afraid to believe it. Outside, the air had cleared, the drizzle had stopped, leaving the streets shining like polished stone. Grace crossed to the cafe across from the building, the same one where she used to grab coffee before work, and ordered a small latte. The barista, a college kid with a messy bun, didn't recognize her. That anonymity was strangely comforting. She sat by the window, watching the flow of pedestrians. Her reflection shimmered faintly on the glass. A new outreach division, helping people, connecting the company to real lives. It sounded impossible, like something from a better version of her own story. Her phone buzzed. Mrs. Alvarez, of course. "Well?" the older woman asked the moment Grace answered. "I think I have a new job," Grace said, her voice trembling between laughter and disbelief. "You think?" Mrs. Alvarez chuckled. "Either you do or you don't, dear." "He said he wants me to help start a community foundation," Grace explained. "He said I have the heart for it, and that—" There was a small pause, then a warm sigh.
"Ay, Nina, see? I told you. When you do good, good finds you back. It just takes the long way sometimes."
Grace smiled, tears pricking her eyes. "I hope so." When she arrived home that afternoon, Noah was sitting on the floor building a tower of Legos taller than his head. "Mom, you're home early!" "I had a meeting," she said, setting her purse down. "A good one. Did you get your job back?" Something like that. She sat beside him, helping stack the next red piece. "I'll be working with a new part of the company, helping people in the community. Kind of like what Mrs. Alvarez does at church." He looked up, his brown eyes bright. "So you get to help people and get paid for it?" Grace laughed. "That's the plan." He nodded solemnly. "That's the best kind of job." They spent the rest of the afternoon making dinner together, boxed macaroni, canned peas, and laughter. Simple food, but it tasted like relief. Later that evening, Grace sat at the small kitchen table, filling out the paperwork Patricia had emailed. As she signed her name at the bottom, she felt something shift inside her. For the first time since the divorce, she wasn't surviving out of fear, she was moving forward with purpose. The next morning, Elliot's black town car pulled up in front of her building to take her to Aurora's downtown office for orientation. Mrs. Alvarez waved from her porch again, Noah beside her holding his lunchbox like a badge of honor. "Good luck, Mama," he shouted. Grace waved back, her heart swelling. "Thank you, baby." Inside the car, the driver smiled politely. "Mr. Chambers asked me to tell you he's glad you accepted." Grace blinked, startled. "He already knew?" "Yes, ma'am," the driver said, eyes crinkling with humor. "Said you'd say yes before you even realized it." She looked out the window, the city gliding by in streaks of light and color. For a brief, dizzy moment, she allowed herself to believe in second chances, not the kind people write in greeting cards, but the kind life offers when you least expect it. As the car turned onto the bridge, she saw the reflection of the river gray and still, with just enough ripple to catch the light. It looked like hope itself, quietly moving forward. When she stepped into the Aurora lobby again, the receptionist smiled and handed her a new ID badge. The laminate gleamed under the lights. Grace Whitmore, Community Liaison. She took a deep breath. The job, the kindness, the mistake, the miracle, everything had led to this. And though the day was still young, Grace felt as if she'd already arrived somewhere she'd been heading for years. Outside, clouds parted enough for sunlight to break through the glass facade. Spilling gold across the marble floor, Grace paused in that light, a soft smile touching her lips. It wasn't the end of her troubles, but maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of her becoming whole again. Good evening, friends. Sometimes, life gives us the strangest coincidences. like how a single act of kindness can circle back when we least expect it. By the end of Grace's first week at Aurora's new community division, her days began to settle into a quiet rhythm. She arrived early, coffee in hand, and left just as the sky began to turn amber over the river. The office wasn't like the one she'd left behind. People smiled more here, talked about volunteering, about real lives instead of profit margins. Still, she couldn't help feeling like an imposter. Every time she caught her reflection in the glass walls, hair neatly tied, name badge shining, she wondered when someone would realize she didn't belong. Elliot had been recovering fast. The cast on his ankle had been replaced with a lighter brace, and though he still used a cane, he moved with his usual quiet authority. Occasionally, Grace caught glimpses of him during meetings, a tall figure in dark suits, sleeves rolled up, eyes thoughtful behind thin-rimmed glasses. He never mentioned the accident, never treated her differently. But every time their paths crossed, he nodded, just slightly, as if to say, "I remember." One late afternoon, she was sorting donation requests when Patricia appeared at her cubicle. "Mr. Chambers asked if you're free for a few minutes." Grace's heart fluttered. Now, Patricia said with a kind smile. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. When the doors opened, she found Elliot at his desk, studying a folder filled with photos of community shelters. He looked up, gesturing for her to come in. "Grace, have a seat. I wanted to show you something." On the table lay a stack of proposals, neatly labeled. Aurora Foundation. Pilot programs. He tapped one with his finger. "This is yours." "Mine?" she echoed. "Yes, the outreach event you suggested, the local food drive in the East District. We're going to fund it." Ugh. Her eyes widened. "But that was just an idea during lunch. I didn't think—" "It was a good one," he interrupted gently. "The kind that matters." Grace looked down at the file, her name typed neatly under Project Lead. For a moment, her throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll make it happen," he said, smiling. "And that you'll keep believing people notice when you do good." Something in his tone, soft, almost wistful, made her wonder if he was talking about more than work. "I will," she said quietly. "Thank you for trusting me." He leaned back in his chair, watching her for a moment. "I've been meaning to ask, what made you stop that morning? Most people would have walked past." Grace hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe because once, when Noah was little, I was the one who needed help, and someone stopped for me. It wasn't much, just a stranger who gave me a ride when my car broke down in the rain. But I never forgot." Elliot nodded slowly. "So, you returned the favor." "I guess so. Funny thing about kindness," he said, gazing out the window. "It tends to echo." Silence filled the office. Not awkward, but warm. Grace stood to leave, still clutching the file. "I'll start organizing the food drive right away." "Take your time," he said. "And Grace?" She turned. "I'm glad it was you who stopped." Her cheeks flushed. She smiled faintly and left before her voice could betray her. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The folder lay open on her small dining table, its clean pages filled with possibilities, lists of shelters, contact numbers, hand-drawn maps. She traced her finger over her own name under Project Lead and smiled. It didn't feel real. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. She poured herself a cup of tea, the old kettle clicking softly, and thought about Elliot's words. Kindness tends to echo. By morning, she was ready. She spent the next week visiting community centers, talking with volunteers, and drafting flyers for the food drive. Everywhere she went, people welcomed her with warmth that surprised her. Maybe it was her sincerity, or maybe Portland had more goodness hidden under its gray skies than she'd ever realized. At the Morning Brew Cafe, where she'd first stopped after losing her job, the owner agreed to place a donation box near the counter. "You're that lady who helped the man with the broken leg, aren't you?" he asked, handing her a roll of tape. Grace blushed. "Word travels fast," he grinned. "Around here it does. Good deeds are rarer than sunshine." By the end of the week, she had 20 local businesses signed up. Patricia helped her set up an internal newsletter to invite Aurora employees to volunteer. For the first time in months, Grace woke each morning with purpose instead of worry. Friday evening, as she packed up to leave, Her phone buzzed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello? Grace? It's Elliot." Her heart gave a startled leap. "Oh, good evening, Mr. Chambers. Please, it's Elliot. I just wanted to check in. How's the food drive shaping up?" "Better than I hoped," she said, glancing at the stack of signed forms on her desk. "We've got local bakeries, a pharmacy, even a small bookstore helping out. People are excited." "That's because they trust you," he said simply. Grace laughed softly. "I think they just like free cookies." "Maybe," he replied, amusement coloring his voice. "Still, I wanted you to know I'll be there, Saturday morning before the press shows up." Her breath caught. "You will?" "Yes. I think it's time Aurora shows up for the city, not as a headline, but as a neighbor." Something inside her loosened, a quiet recognition of shared intent. "Then I'll make sure there's coffee waiting." "Deal," he said. After hanging up, she sat for a while in the dim office light, listening to the faint hum of the building. Outside, the skyline shimmered with rain. She thought about how only 2 weeks ago she'd walked these same halls with a box of her belongings, believing everything was over. Now, she was building something not just a job, but a bridge between worlds. Saturday came with a soft light of early autumn. Grace arrived at the community park before sunrise, setting up tables under the shelter of maple trees. The air smelled of wet leaves and cinnamon from the bakery truck parked nearby. Volunteers trickled in, young and old, employees in Aurora t-shirts, a few families she recognized from the shelters. When Elliot arrived, cane in hand, people turned to look. He didn't seem like the kind of man who was used to mud or folding tables, but he greeted everyone easily. Grace watched as he knelt carefully, stiffly to help a boy unpack boxes of canned soup. For a moment, she saw not the CEO, but a man trying to make amends with the world. Later, as sunlight broke through the trees, he joined her near the donation tent. "You did this," he said quietly. "You made it happen." "We did," she corrected. He smiled. "You're right. We did." The event ran until noon. Families came. Laughter carried over the hum of music and chatter. Grace moved through the crowd, checking lists, shaking hands, answering questions. Every time she looked up, Elliot was nearby, not hovering, but present, steady, like a quiet promise. When it was finally over, she sank onto a bench beneath the maples, tired and glowing. Elliot brought her a paper cup of cider. "You're a natural at this," he said. "Maybe," she said, smiling faintly, "but I'm better at making mac and cheese." He laughed, a sound she hadn't heard before, deep and genuine. It startled her in the best way. As they sat watching volunteers pack up, Grace realized how strangely peaceful she felt. Not triumphant, not overwhelmed, just right where she was supposed to be. Elliot stood after a moment, leaning on his cane. "Next week, I'd like to talk about expanding this. Maybe a holiday drive. Something larger." Grace nodded. "I'd love that." He offered his hand, helping her up. Then it settled. Their fingers lingered a second longer than necessary before he stepped back, his smile unreadable. When she walked home later, the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. She passed the cafe window and caught her reflection, tired, happy, a little amazed. The city didn't seem so gray anymore. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of something far bigger than either of them could name. The Monday after the food drive, the news hit faster than Grace expected. Local stations ran cheerful coverage. Aurora Tech CEO joined single mom in citywide food effort. Photos showed her laughing beside Elliot beneath the maple trees, sleeves rolled up, her name printed in captions she hadn't approved. When she arrived at the office that morning, whispers trailed her through the hallway. Some colleagues smiled. Others looked away. Patricia greeted her with a quiet, knowing nod. "You might want to brace yourself," she said. "The board's meeting today. Not everyone is happy about the attention." Grace felt her stomach tighten. But it was a charity event. Exactly, Patricia said. "That's not where most of them think profits are made." Before Grace could reply, her phone buzzed an internal message from Elliot. "Conference room B, 10 minutes." She took a deep breath, straightened her blazer, and walked down the long corridor lined with glass walls. Inside, the boardroom glowed with early sunlight and tension. 6 executives sat around the oval table, all in sharp suits and cooler expressions. Elliot stood at the head of the table, cane resting beside him, face calm but unreadable. "Grace," he said, motioning for her to join him. This is Miss Whitmore. She led the outreach project you've all read about. A man in a navy suit, sharp jaw, sharper tone leaned forward. Yes. The project that made front-page news without prior approval. Grace opened her mouth, but Elliot spoke first. The coverage was unplanned, but beneficial. Aurora's community engagement ratings rose 20% over the weekend. That's PR spin, the man said. We're a tech company, not a social foundation. Grace glanced at Elliot. He didn't flinch. We're both, he said evenly. Technology serves people, not the other way around. A woman near the end of the table adjusted her glasses. With respect, Mr. Chambers. The optics of this, you being photographed with a former employee who was dismissed, wrongfully dismissed. Elliot interrupted. Grace froze. He continued, his voice calm but firm. Miss Whitmore's termination reflected a lapse in leadership, not her performance. That mistake has been corrected. Silence hung heavy. Grace could feel the eyes of every executive on her. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she kept her head high. The man in navy exhaled sharply. You're making personnel exceptions based on sentiment. Elliot smiled faintly, though his tone carried steel. Based on humanity, which, as of this quarter, will be part of our mission statement. Patricia, standing near the back with her tablet, hid a grin behind her hand. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out in a hush of murmured objections. Grace lingered by the window, the city sprawling beneath them like a painting. That went better than expected, she said cautiously. Elliot chuckled, leaning on his cane. That depends on what you expected. She turned to face him. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, I did, he said simply. You did the right thing when it cost you everything. The least I can do is the same. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The morning sun caught the side of his face, softening the lines around his eyes. He looked tired, but proud not of himself, she realized, but of her. Thank you, she whispered. He gave a small nod. You've earned more than thanks. I'd like you to represent Aurora at the city council meeting next week. They're reviewing our new community grant proposal. Her eyes widened. Me? But I've never... You'll do fine, he said. You listen better than most people talk. Grace laughed nervously. That's generous of you to say. True, not generous, he replied. As she turned to leave, Elliot called after her. Grace, don't let their judgment define you. Most of them forgot what it feels like to care. She met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, mutual respect, and something gentler underneath it. I won't, she said, and she meant it. That afternoon, as she walked out of the tower and into the crisp October air, Grace realized the fear she used to carry, the constant, quiet dread of failure, had faded. In its place was something steadier. Not pride, not ambition, just faith in herself, and in the strange, stubborn goodness that had carried her this far. But faith, she would soon learn, was about to be tested again. The following week, autumn settled deep into Portland. Trees along the waterfront blazed with color, their leaves tumbling through the air like embers. Grace stood outside City Hall, clutching her notes, her heart thudding against her ribs. The marble steps looked endless. Reporters lingered near the entrance, their cameras already trained on the double doors. Aurora Tech's proposal to expand community grants had drawn more attention than anyone expected. Half the city seemed to have an opinion about whether a major tech firm should play philanthropist. Just breathe, Patricia whispered beside her, smoothing Grace's blazer collar. You'll be fine. You've got truth on your side. MC, I'd rather have a little less truth and a little more experience, Grace murmured. Patricia smiled. Experience grows from days like this. Inside, the council chamber buzzed with low voices. Rows of local residents filled the benches, small business owners, volunteers, skeptics. At the front sat the 5 council members, their nameplates gleaming under the lights. Elliot entered just before the session began, nodding to her as he passed. His presence steadied her more than she cared to admit. When her name was called, Grace walked to the podium, her palms damp but her chin high. Miss Whitmore, the chairman said, you're representing Aurora Foundation? Yes, sir, she replied. And our goal is simple: to connect corporate resources with community needs. She spoke slowly, carefully, describing the food drive, the volunteer response, the difference it had made in neighborhoods that rarely saw help without red tape. "We're not trying to fix the city," she said, her voice gaining strength. "We're trying to listen to it." A murmur rippled through the audience. One councilwoman leaned forward. "That's noble, Miss Whitmore. But many citizens question whether this is genuine outreach or just an image campaign." Grace hesitated, then spoke the truth. "I used to work for Aurora," she said softly. "I was fired for being late after stopping to help a man injured on the street. That man was Mr. Chambers. The company didn't know my name then, but they do now. Not because of publicity, because they chose to change." The room fell still. Elliot watched her from his seat in the front row, his eyes unreadable but proud. Grace continued, "I'm not a PR expert or an executive. I'm a mother who believes doing the right thing should never be punished. If this grant helps even one person keep their job, feed their child, or feel seen, then that's not image. That's humanity." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then quiet applause began in the back, spreading until the chamber filled with sound. The chairman cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Whitmore. The council will review the proposal." Grace stepped back, her knees weak but her spirit steady. When the session ended, reporters swarmed near the steps. Patricia intercepted most of them, shielding Grace as Elliot approached. "You were extraordinary," he said simply. "I was terrified," she confessed. "That's how you know it mattered." A flashbulb went off nearby, catching them mid-conversation. Grace flinched, but Elliot only smiled at the reporters, then turned back to her. "Don't worry about the headlines," he said quietly. "Let them write what they want. You spoke truth. That's what people remember." She nodded, still reeling from the adrenaline. "Do you think the council will approve it?" "I think they'd be foolish not to," he said, then added with a softer tone. "And even if they don't, you've already changed something more important." "What's that?" "People's perception of what kindness looks like when it refuses to back down." That night, Grace sat by her window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. Her phone buzzed a text from an unknown number. "This is Margaret Lynn, City Council. The proposal passed. Unanimous vote. Congratulations." Grace covered her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. She looked down at the street below, where reflections of headlights rippled in the puddles like liquid gold. A soft knock came at the door, Mrs. Alvarez holding a small pie. "Saw the news," she said with a grin. "You're famous now." Grace laughed through her tears. "Famous for talking too much, maybe." The older woman shook her head. "Famous for standing up. There's a difference." Grace hugged her tightly, the scent of cinnamon and apples wrapping around her like comfort itself. Later, after Mrs. Alvarez left and Noah was asleep, Grace opened her window. The air smelled of rain and distant cedar. For the first time, she felt her life wasn't spiraling away from her, it was unfolding. And though she couldn't see him, she knew somewhere across the city, Elliot was probably looking out another window, thinking of that same word that had carried them both through the storm. Good evening, friends. Sometimes when a person's heart begins to heal, life sends gentle reminders that kindness has a longer echo than we imagine. It had been 2 weeks since the City Council's vote. Aurora's community program was now official, and Grace found herself busier than ever: meetings, calls, interviews. But the whirlwind didn't bother her. It was a good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from doing something that mattered. Every morning she passed the bakery on Hawthorne Avenue, where the owner now greeted her with, "Morning, Miss Whitmore, still saving the city?" She would laugh and reply, "Just trying to keep it fed." Her story had quietly become a local symbol, not for scandal, but for change. People sent letters to Aurora thanking the company for listening. Some even enclosed handwritten notes for her. "You made me believe again in doing the right thing," one said. Elliot had insisted she move her workspace to the same floor as the executive offices, saying it would make coordination easier. But the truth was, their conversations had begun to stretch beyond work. They would meet after hours in his office, the city glowing beyond the window, talking about everything from childhood memories to what forgiveness really meant. "I used to think success was about control," Elliot confessed one evening, absently turning the silver pen in his hand. "Then one morning, I couldn't even stand without help. Grace looked at him quietly. Maybe that's what it took for you to see the rest of us. He smiled faintly. You make that sound like grace disguised as irony. Maybe it is, she said. Sometimes life's lessons don't shout. They whisper. Their connection deepened in those quiet hours, not rushed, not reckless. Just two people who had both lost faith in different ways, finding it again, one conversation at a time. Still, Grace was cautious. The line between gratitude and affection blurred easily. She didn't want to misread his kindness, nor let hope outrun reason. But there were moments fleeting, fragile, when she caught him watching her, as if she were more than just an employee. And in those seconds, the air felt different, almost tender. One Friday afternoon, as the office emptied for the weekend, Elliot appeared at her door. He wasn't in his usual suit, but a navy sweater and dark jeans, his cane gone. You're walking without it, she said, smiling. Finally, he replied. Physical therapy says I'm officially stable. That's wonderful, Mr. Chambers. Elliot, he corrected softly. You've earned first-name privileges. She laughed. All right, Elliot, what brings you down here? He hesitated, then held out 2 tickets. There's a community orchestra performing tomorrow at Waterfront Park. They're donating proceeds to the shelter fund. I thought you might like to go. Grace blinked. Are you inviting me as your assistant? Or as... His smile was gentle, a little uncertain, as someone I'd like to share an evening with. Oh, for a moment, words failed her. Outside the window, the city lights flickered like stars caught between buildings. I'd love to, she said finally, her voice soft but sure. Good, he replied, relief flickering across his face. 7 o'clock. I'll pick you up. When he left, Grace sat for a while in the quiet office, the hum of distant traffic filling the silence. She pressed the ticket between her fingers, smiling to herself. It wasn't a date, not officially, but something in her heart knew better. The next evening, the air along the river carried a chill of early winter. Lights strung across the park glowed softly, reflecting off the water. Grace arrived in a deep green coat, her hair loose for once. Elliot was waiting near the stage, hands in his pockets, looking almost boyish without his usual armor of professionalism. You look, he stopped, searching for the right word. At peace, she smiled. That's new for me. And they found seats together as the orchestra tuned up, the first notes rising like a prayer into the cold night. And as the music swelled, Grace felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the weather, the quiet certainty that this, whatever it was becoming, might just be the start of something that mattered. The music began softly, violins weaving through the chill air, horns echoing over the dark river. Grace sat beside Elliot, their shoulders almost touching. The park lights shimmered on the water, turning the night into something tender and fragile. For the first few songs, they said nothing. Words would have felt too heavy. When the orchestra played Moon River, Grace felt her throat tighten. It was a song her mother used to hum while cooking, back when life was simpler. You okay? Elliot asked quietly. She nodded, smiling faintly. Just remembering. He looked at her for a moment. Funny thing, he said. I've been doing a lot of remembering too. They fell into easy silence again, broken only by laughter from families nearby and the distant hum of passing boats. When the concert ended, applause rippled through the crowd. As they walked toward the parking lot, Grace pulled her coat tighter. Thank you for inviting me. I'd forgotten how beautiful this city can be when you actually stop to look. He smiled. Maybe that's the secret, slowing down long enough to see what's been waiting for us. Fooled. For a moment, they stood by the river's edge, lights dancing on their faces. Grace turned to him, her breath visible in the cold air. Elliot, all of this, the program, the foundation, it's changed so much. I just hope I can live up to it. You already have, he said softly. But I do have one more idea, something I want to share with you first. What kind of idea? He hesitated, hands in his pockets. A new project for the foundation. It's personal, and I think you'll understand why when you hear it. Her brow furrowed, curiosity flickering. You're being mysterious again. He chuckled. Guilty. But I promise, it's something good. Let's talk about it on Monday. Grace nodded, though a quiet unease stirred beneath her calm. They lingered another moment under the lamplight, the world narrowing to the sound of the river and their steady breathing. Then he opened the car door for her, his hand brushing hers, a small electric contact that lingered longer than either expected. "Good night, Grace." "Good night, Elliot." As the car pulled away, she looked back through the window at the park, the water, the glow of the city that had somehow become home again. Whatever his idea was, she sensed it wasn't just about work. Something deeper was taking shape, something that could change both of them in ways she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as the city lights blurred behind her, Grace realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of change. She was waiting for it. Monday arrived with gray clouds and the scent of rain rolling in from the river. Grace reached the office early, the sound of her heels echoing down the quiet hallways. On Elliot's desk, 2 mugs of coffee steamed beside a folder marked Aurora Foundation, confidential. He looked up as she entered. "Morning, Grace. Thanks for coming in early." "No problem," she said, setting down her coat. "You mentioned a new project?" "Yes." He paused, studying her face for a moment. "It's something different, something closer to home." He opened the folder and slid a few photographs across the table. They showed a large brick building with boarded-up windows, surrounded by overgrown grass. Grace frowned. "What is this place?" "It used to be the Street Helena Youth Center," he said quietly. "Closed 15 years ago. I was one of the kids who went there after school." She looked up sharply. "You?" He nodded. "My mother worked double shifts. That center was the only reason I didn't end up on the streets." The admission seemed to weigh on him. His voice softened. "When I was old enough to help, I tried to donate, but the city sold the property before I could do anything. I thought about it again recently. After the accident. After you." Grace listened, her chest tightening. "I want to rebuild it," he continued. "Not as a corporate facility, as a place for single parents and their kids. After-school programs, childcare, job training, a real safety net." "That's incredible," she whispered. Elliot gave a small, almost self-conscious smile. "It's called the Helena Project. I'd like you to oversee it." Grace blinked, stunned. "Me? Elliot? That's huge. You have a dozen qualified managers." "I don't need another manager," he said gently. "I need someone who understands what it feels like to start over. Someone who's lived it." For a long moment, Grace couldn't speak. Rain tapped softly against the window, steady and rhythmic. "I don't know what to say," she finally murmured. "Say yes," he said simply. She looked down at the photos again. The crumbling brick, the faded playground, the empty windows, all of it waiting for new life. "If we can bring this back," she said, "we could change so many families' lives." "That's the idea," he replied. "Redemption isn't just personal, Grace. It's something we build for others, too." Something in his words caught her that quiet, vulnerable note she'd only glimpsed before. She saw not the CEO, but a man trying to make peace with his past. "I'll do it," she said softly. "But on one condition." His brow lifted. "Which is?" "That it's not just another Aurora initiative. It should belong to the people who'll use it." He smiled, eyes warming. "Then that's how we'll build it." Their hands brushed as she took the folder. The contact was small, fleeting, yet it carried the weight of unspoken understanding. For the next hour, they went over logistics, zoning permits, funding, outreach. Grace's excitement grew with every page, but beneath it ran an undercurrent. She couldn't ignore the realization that this wasn't just about a building. It was about 2 people rebuilding themselves in parallel. When the meeting ended, Elliot stood by the window, looking out at the mist rising from the river. "You know," he said quietly, "I never told anyone about that place, not even my ex-wife." Grace hesitated at the doorway. "Why tell me?" He turned to face her. "Because you remind me what honesty looks like." The room went still. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was charged, alive, trembling with something neither dared name. Grace broke it first. "Then I'd better make sure I don't let you down." "You won't," he said, voice steady. "You never have." Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, as if the city itself had overheard their secret. Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into the Helena Project with quiet determination, her desk filled with sketches, notes, and proposals. She spoke with architects, nonprofit directors, and even former residents who remembered the youth center in its better days. Every conversation painted a fuller picture laughter from after-school programs, the smell of chalk and old books, a place that had once been a safe harbor for children who had nowhere else to go. But the more she learned, the more questions arose. One evening, while reviewing old city records, she stumbled upon a line in a faded document. Sale of Street Helena property to Aurora Tech Holdings, 2008. Her breath caught. That was 17 years ago, long before Elliot became CEO, but still under the same company name. She read the note again, the words stark under the office lamp. Aurora had purchased the center before it was shut down. The truth landed like a stone in her chest. When Elliot called the next morning asking if she could stop by his office, her heart was already heavy. He was at his desk, sleeves rolled up, papers spread before him. "Grace," he greeted, smiling. "I wanted to show you the preliminary budget. Why didn't you tell me Aurora owned Street Helena?" She interrupted, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. Elliot froze. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, "You found the records?" "Yes. The company bought the land years before it was closed. You said the city sold it before you could help. That wasn't true, was it?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair, guilt flickering across his face. "Not entirely. The board purchased the property as an investment. I was on the acquisitions team back then. I didn't fight hard enough to stop them." Grace's throat tightened. "So, the center that once helped you was shut down because of your company?" "Because of me," he said quietly. "I was younger, ambitious. I told myself it was just business. And when the kids lost their place, I buried the guilt under promotions and profits." The confession hung in the air, heavy as the rain beginning to fall outside. Grace stared at him, hurt and disbelief mixing in her chest. "So this project, this big redemption story, is it about helping families or about forgiving yourself?" His gaze met hers, raw and unguarded. "Both." "But Grace, it's not just guilt driving this. It's what I should have done years ago, what I need to do now." She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. But another part, the part that had rebuilt her life brick by brick after losing everything, hesitated. "You should have told me," she said softly. "Honesty matters." "I know," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I was afraid that if you knew, you'd walk away. And this project, it can't work without you." And Grace stood by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass in silver trails. "You're wrong," she said quietly. "It can work without me, but it can't work without truth." He rose from his chair, moving closer, his tone pleading now. "Grace, I'm not the man who made that mistake. I'm trying to be better because you reminded me what better looks like." Tears blurred her vision. "Then prove it, not to me, but to those families. Make this center about them, not about redemption." He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his features. "You're right." The silence that followed was thick and fragile. When she finally turned to leave, he didn't stop her. Outside, the rain had turned to a steady downpour, soaking her coat as she stepped into the gray light of afternoon. The folder she carried pressed against her chest like a heartbeat. Behind her, in that high corner office, Elliot stood motionless by the window, watching her disappear into the mist, the woman who had once saved his life, now walking away because of the truth he'd been too afraid to tell. And for the first time since that rainy morning months ago, Grace felt lost again, but stronger, too, because this time, she knew her worth didn't depend on anyone else's redemption. As she reached the corner, her phone buzzed with a message from Elliot. "Thank you for being honest, even when I wasn't. I'll make it right." She closed her eyes, rain on her lashes, and whispered to herself, "Then maybe there's still hope." The city lights flickered to life through the storm, and somewhere between regret and forgiveness, something quietly shifted, not ending, but waiting for its second beginning. 3 days passed. Portland's rain finally broke into pale sunlight, but Grace still carried the storm inside her. She worked from home, ignoring calls from the office, from Elliot. She needed space to think, to breathe. On the 4th morning, a knock came at her door. When she opened it, she found Patricia standing there, holding a sealed envelope and a soft smile. "He asked me to bring this," Patricia said. "No pressure. Just read it." Grace thanked her, closing the door behind her. The envelope bore Elliot's neat handwriting, Inside was a single-page letter and a photo of the Street Helena building, surrounded by scaffolding workers already repainting its faded walls. The letter was simple. Asterisk, I told you I'd make it right. We're donating full ownership of the property to the city's nonprofit coalition. No Aurora logos, no PR, just a home for families as it should have been. You were right, Grace. Redemption can't be branded, but it can be shared. Grace sat down, the paper trembling in her hands. For the first time since their argument, she smiled, small, but real. That afternoon, she visited the construction site. The air smelled of sawdust and new beginnings. Volunteers painted walls, a bright sky blue. Children played in puddles nearby. And then she saw him. Elliot, sleeves rolled, jeans dusted with paint, hammering a new sign into the fence. The Helena Community Center, a place to start again. He turned, spotting her. For a moment, neither moved. Then Grace walked toward him through the mud, her heart pounding. You actually did it, she said quietly. I had to, he replied. You were right, this wasn't about me. Grace looked around, at the laughter and noise filling the air. It's beautiful, she whispered. So are second chances, he said softly. They stood there for a while, the noise of hammers and children blending with the distant river breeze. The anger she'd carried slowly dissolved, replaced by something steadier, forgiveness, maybe, or the fragile beginning of it. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. If you really mean to start over, you'll need help. Elliot smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. By the end of the month, the new Helena Community Center was ready to open. The building that once stood forgotten now gleamed with fresh paint, laughter, and the smell of newly baked cookies from the volunteer kitchen. Grace arrived early that morning with Noah, who bounced with excitement at the sight of the colorful playground. Is this really yours, Mom? He asked. It's everyone's now, she said, smiling. A place for kids like you and parents like me. Elliot joined them soon after, wearing a simple gray jacket instead of a suit. His hands were rough with paint and work, not business meetings. We did it, he said softly. Grace nodded. No, you did it. You kept your word. He looked at her, eyes warm. Not alone. None of this would exist without you. The opening ceremony was small neighbors, city workers, volunteers, a few reporters, but no flash, no grand speeches, just people. Elliot spoke briefly about second chances, about the beauty of rebuilding. Grace followed, her voice trembling with emotion as she talked about community, kindness, and learning to trust again. When she stepped down, Noah ran to her side, tugging her sleeve. Mom, Mister. Elliot said he's going to show me the science room. Can I go? Grace smiled, glancing at Elliot. Of course, honey. Be careful. Watching them walk ahead, Noah's hand in Elliot's Grace felt something shift inside her. For the first time, it didn't scare her to imagine a future where trust wasn't a risk, but a homecoming. Later that afternoon, as the last guests left, Elliot found her standing by the window overlooking the courtyard. Children were still playing, their laughter echoing through the hall. Feels different, doesn't it? He said quietly. Grace nodded. Feels like peace. He hesitated, then offered a small box. Inside lay a photo of the three of them from earlier that day, Noah between them, beaming, paint on his cheeks. Patricia took it, Elliot said. Thought we should have something to remember today. Grace held the photo carefully. It's perfect. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the city gold. For a long moment, they stood side by side, not speaking. There was no need. The silence said everything about forgiveness, about beginnings, about love that came softly after the rain. And as Noah's laughter rang through the halls of the place they'd built together, Grace finally believed what she'd once only hoped, that kindness, when nurtured, could grow into a family. It had been 1 year since that rainy morning. Portland's spring air carried the scent of lilacs and new beginnings. The Helena Community Center stood bright and alive, children's laughter echoing through the hallways Grace once walked in fear and uncertainty. She paused by the mural in the main hall, two hands reaching toward each other over painted words. Second chances begin with kindness. Her heart swelled every time she read it. Mom! Noah's voice rang out. The boy ran down the corridor holding a handmade robot. Mr. Elliot says I can help with the science club today. Grace smiled. Then you'd better listen to him, scientist. Elliot appeared behind Noah, wearing a light gray jacket, and the same easy smile she'd grown to know so well. "He's the best recruit we've had," he said. Grace raised an eyebrow. "You say that about everyone." "Not everyone," he replied softly. They walked together toward the garden patio. Tulips lined the fence, sunlight spilling over the playground. It still amazed Grace how something that began in pain had bloomed into so much life. "You ever think about that morning?" she asked quietly. "The one where all this started?" Elliot nodded. "Every day. It reminds me that small moments can change everything." Grace smiled faintly. "I guess being late for work wasn't the worst thing I ever did." They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes easily when two people finally stop carrying old weight. Inside, Noah's laughter joined theirs, pure and light. Elliot turned to her, his voice gentle. "Grace, thank you for stopping that day, for believing that kindness still mattered." She met his gaze, her eyes bright with emotion. "You gave me a reason to keep believing." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed softly around them, alive and forgiving. And in that quiet, Grace realized the truth. They hadn't just built a center, they'd built a home. That afternoon, the Helena Community Center filled with music and laughter. Parents chatted over coffee. Children painted bright hearts on the courtyard walls. Grace stood near the entrance, watching the life that had grown from one act of kindness. Elliot joined her, holding a small envelope. "For you," he said quietly. Inside was a letter. "Recognition of service, Grace Whitmore, Director, Helena Community Center." Grace blinked back tears. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said. "You built this with more than plans and donations. You built it with heart." "I." She smiled, tucking the letter close. "Then let's keep building." Noah ran up, face covered in paint. "Mom, Mr. Elliot, come see the mural, it's shining." They followed him outside, where the sunset cast a golden glow over the wall. Second chances begin with kindness. Grace looked at Elliot, then at Noah, her voice soft. "It's true, isn't it?" Elliot nodded. "Kindness gave us everything." They stood there together, hand in hand, as the last light faded and the city hummed quietly around them, not perfect, but peaceful. Because sometimes redemption isn't loud or grand. It's just the quiet warmth of knowing you finally came home. Sometimes life gives us storms so we can learn how to walk again in the sunlight. Grace, Elliot, and little Noah began as three lonely souls whose paths crossed on a rainy morning, and through kindness, forgiveness, and courage, they built something stronger than any company or plan: a family. The Helena Community Center wasn't just a building. It became a symbol of how compassion can rebuild not only walls, but hearts. To everyone listening tonight, maybe you've had your own rainy mornings, the kind that change everything when you least expect it. Maybe you've helped someone without knowing it would come full circle one day. Life has a quiet way of rewarding kindness. It might not happen fast, but it always finds its way back, just like sunlight finding its reflection after the storm. The lesson? Love and forgiveness are never wasted. Unconditional kindness can change the course of a life. Everyone, no matter their past, deserves to be seen, loved, and given a chance to shine again. Happiness comes not from wealth or success, but from the simple act of caring for others. Like the warm porch light left on for someone coming home late, a single act of kindness can guide us through life's darkest corners. Maybe it's sharing a meal, calling an old friend, or helping a neighbor in need. Those are the true heartbeats of redemption and family. So tonight, before you turn off the radio or close your eyes, take a quiet moment to remember someone who once showed you kindness. Maybe it's time to pass that light forward. If this story touched your heart, please comment one below. If you think we could make it even better, press 0 and share your thoughts, because stories like this live on through you. And as always, I wish you peace, warmth, and good health.